"Hey babe, how's the conference going?" Anthony asked, pacing the living room with the phone pressed against his ear. He absent-mindedly glanced at the framed pictures on the wall, memories from their wedding and vacations, the life they had built together. Belinda's voice came through, a little muffled by what sounded like loud chatter in the background. "Oh, it's fine. Just finishing up a session. I'll call you later." "Okay," Anthony paused. The response felt a bit too rushed, the kind of tone someone uses when they're eager to end a conversation. He hesitated before replying. "Alright, love you." "Love you too," she said. But there was a hollow quality to her words that lingered in Anthony's ears after she hung up. He stared at the phone for a moment, furrowing his brows. Something was off, but he couldn't quite place it. He sank into the couch, setting the phone down on the table. A small sigh escaped him as he rubbed his temples. Belinda had been distant for the past few months, ever since she started traveling more for her new job. Long hours, late-night meetings, constant business trips, it all piled up. But he convinced himself that it was just work stress, that they would get through this phase. Corey, his best friend since childhood, had reassured him countless times. "She's probably just overwhelmed, man. It's a new job. Those take a while to settle into," Corey had said, his voice always calm and convincing. Anthony trusted both of them. Corey had been his rock since they were kids. And Belinda, well, she was his wife, the woman he'd vowed to spend the rest of his life with. What reason did he have to doubt either of them? His mind wandered to memories of their early days. He remembered when Belinda used to text him just to say she missed him, even when they had only been apart for a few hours. Those late-night talks, spontaneous dates, and the way they would laugh at the silliest things. It felt like forever ago. But he held on to those memories like they were life rafts. "It's just a rough patch," he muttered to himself, trying to shake off the unease growing in his chest. As if on cue, his phone buzzed on the table, snapping him back to the present. He looked down. It was Belinda's number. His hand reached for the phone. "Hello," he said, pressing the phone to his ear. At first it was just static. He almost hung up, thinking it was a pocket dial. But then he heard muffled voices, barely audible through the noise. He strained to make sense of it. And suddenly a voice broke through, clear and unmistakable. "Your husband really thinks you're working? What an idiot." Anthony froze in place. His brain took a moment to process what he was hearing. The voice, it was Corey. He was sure of it. The static faded, and the conversation became clearer. "That clueless loser is paying for everything while you enjoy my Big Johnson." Corey's voice continued, followed by a chuckle that sent a shiver down Anthony's spine. He felt his pulse quicken, his hand trembling as he gripped the phone tighter. There had to be some mistake. But before he could gather his thoughts, he heard Belinda's voice, soft and familiar, but with a cold edge that made his stomach twist. "He's too dumb to realize I've checked out of the marriage a long time ago. Don't bother mentioning him now. He makes me puke." Anthony's world seemed to stop. His mouth went dry and his heart pounded so loudly, he could barely hear the rest of their conversation. Belinda's laugh echoed in his ears, each note like a knife twisting deeper into his chest. The phone slipped from his grasp and hit the floor with a dull thud. He stared at it, unable to move, unable to think. His mind raced, trying to grasp onto any thread of logic that would explain what he just heard. Corey and Belinda. His best friend and his wife. The two people he trusted more than anyone in the world were together. Behind his back. How long had this been going on? And how could he have been so blind? Anthony sat down hard on the edge of the couch, his hands running through his hair in disbelief. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the pictures again, the photos of a life he thought he knew, memories now tainted by betrayal. The laughter, that's what haunted him the most. The way Belinda had laughed at him like he was some joke, like their entire marriage had been nothing but a farce. And Corey, the man he considered a brother, laughing along with her, mocking him. Every memory, every moment he'd shared with the two of them now felt like poison. How many times had the three of them sat around the dinner table laughing and talking while this was happening behind his back? How many times had Corey looked him in the eye pretending to be his friend, all while betraying him? Anthony's fists clenched, knuckles white. He could feel the anger bubbling up inside him, threatening to overflow. He wanted to smash something, anything to let the fury out. But then, just as quickly as the anger had come, it was replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. No, he wasn't going to let them see him break. They thought they had fooled him, played him for a fool, but they had no idea what was coming. Slowly he stood up, his movements deliberate. He picked up the phone from the floor, staring at the screen for a long moment before setting it back on the table. His mind was already moving, already planning. He wasn't going to confront them. That would be too easy, too simple. They didn't deserve the satisfaction of seeing his pain. No, he was going to make them feel the consequences of their betrayal, and when it was over they would regret ever crossing him. Anthony's heart felt like it was made of stone as he walked down the hallway and into the bedroom. He opened Belinda's closet, staring at her clothes, her shoes, the life they had shared, now hollow and meaningless. He reached up and pulled down a suitcase boxes from the top shelf, laying it on the bed. His hands worked methodically, folding her clothes, packing them away. Each item he placed in the suitcase felt like another layer of his old life being stripped away. He found her favorite dress, the one she wore on their anniversary, and tossed it in without a second thought. When he was done, he zipped the boxes closed and stood back, surveying the room. It was empty now, just like his heart. Anthony took a deep breath, pulling out his phone again. He dialed the number for a delivery service and made the arrangements tomorrow, his voice calm and controlled. The suitcase would be sent to Corey's house, along with a note, a simple message that said it all. "Bitch, you belong to the streets. Goodbye." The house was silent, but for the first time, Anthony felt at peace. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Anthony sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The phone lay in front of him, dark and silent as if nothing had happened, but Anthony's mind replayed the conversation he'd overheard. Corey's smug voice and Belinda's cruel laughter cutting into him over and over again. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that felt oppressive. He could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, but all of it blurred into the background as his thoughts took over. Hours passed, though Anthony didn't notice the time. He had entered a trance-like state, a dark place between shock and fury. His mind, at first scattered with disbelief, began to piece together the puzzle. He thought back to every late-night trip Belinda had taken, every time Corey had given him advice, every subtle shift in their behavior over the last few months. It was all so clear now. "They think I'm a fool," he muttered under his breath, the words barely audible but sharp as glass. His jaw clenched, and the initial disbelief that had frozen him slowly melted away, replaced by an intense anger. But it wasn't the kind of reckless rage that would make him confront them right away. No, that would be too easy for them. They'd probably expect it, maybe even laugh about it later. Anthony stood up slowly, every movement deliberate, as if he were controlling a fire inside that threatened to explode. He wasn't going to let them get away with this. He wouldn't be the helpless, betrayed husband they imagined him to be. His face hardened with resolve. That night he didn't sleep. The plan began to form in his mind, taking shape with each passing hour. If they wanted to play with his life, he would take away everything they valued. They'd never see it coming. Anthony spent hours on his computer, quietly researching his options. He found divorce attorneys, drafted emails, and made lists of every legal move he needed to make. He called a lawyer first thing in the morning, explaining the situation in detail, but keeping his emotions in check. There was no room for weakness now. "Give me the best restraining order you can," Anthony said, his voice cold and controlled. "Understood," the lawyer replied, jotting down notes. "We'll get the paperwork started immediately. Do you have evidence of the affair?" Anthony's lips twitched. "I have a recording." The lawyer paused, surprised. "That'll help. I'll file everything under breach of trust. We'll make sure the divorce is fast and ruthless." When he hung up, Anthony allowed himself a small, bitter smile. He wasn't just going to end this marriage. He was going to make sure Belinda and Corey felt the full weight of their betrayal. The next morning, Anthony went to work as if nothing had happened. He greeted his colleagues with a smile, made small talk in the break room, and even shared a laugh with a coworker about a project they were working on. To anyone watching, he was the same old Anthony. But inside, every conversation, every smile was hollow. His thoughts were consumed by what he would do next. At lunch he excused himself and stepped outside to make a few discreet calls. He arranged for a moving company to come to the house that evening, one that was known for being quick and efficient. He made sure that everything would be ready before Belinda returned from her business trip. That evening, after leaving the office, Anthony drove home and parked in the driveway, his heart pounding, though he kept his face impassive. The movers were already waiting by the curb. "Just those boxes in the bedroom," Anthony told the head mover as he opened the front door. "Pack everything carefully." The movers nodded and went straight to work. Anthony stood back, arms folded across his chest, watching as they packed Belinda's belongings into neat, efficient piles. Her clothes, her shoes, the framed photos she had insisted on keeping in the bedroom, all of it went into boxes without hesitation. The irony of the situation hit him as he walked through the house, thinking of how Belinda had once claimed that this place was their forever home. Now it felt like a hollow shell, the life they had built together reduced to boxes and packing tape. He didn't feel sadness, just a cold determination. Hours later, the movers finished packing. Anthony stood in the living room, surveying the empty spaces where Belinda's things had once been. He had deliberately left nothing behind, making sure that when she returned, she would see how completely she had been erased from the home. "That's everything, sir," the head mover said, handing him the final invoice. Anthony nodded and handed him a check. "Take it all to this address." He handed the mover a slip of paper with Corey's home address written on it. The man raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. "Got it." Anthony watched the truck drive away, the last of Belinda's possessions disappearing into the night. His pulse slowed, a sense of calm washing over him. This was only the beginning. He walked back into the house and sat at the kitchen table. He opened his laptop, pulling up the photos he had taken of the now empty house, the bare bedroom, the clean living room, the empty closet. He printed them out, laying them carefully on the kitchen counter next to the divorce papers. The final touch was the note he'd written earlier. "Bitch, you belong to the streets. Goodbye." Anthony placed it on top of the pile, staring at it for a moment. It wasn't poetic, but it didn't need to be. It was final. It was truth. Later that night, as the house sat in silence, Anthony packed a suitcase of his own. He wasn't going to be here when Belinda got back. He wasn't going to give her the chance to cry, to beg, to make excuses. This was her mess now. Before he left, Anthony did one final thing. He blocked Belinda's number, then blocked Corey's. They would have no way of reaching him, no way to plead for mercy. They had taken everything from him, and now he was taking everything from them. As he stepped out of the house and locked the door behind him, Anthony felt lighter. The old Anthony, the one who had trusted them, who had believed in love and loyalty, was gone. In his place was someone sharper, colder, and much more dangerous. He climbed into his car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. By the time Belinda and Corey realized what had happened, he would be long gone. They thought they had one. But this was just the beginning. Belinda pulled into the driveway, her mind buzzing with exhaustion from the business trip. She was ready to slip back into the routine, put on a smile for Anthony, and pretend everything was normal. The weight of her lies had become almost second nature. She stepped out of the car, keys in hand, and glanced at the dark windows of the house. Odd. Anthony always left at least one light on for her. She shook off the thought, walking up to the front door, her heels clicking against the concrete. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, expecting the familiar hum of home. But what greeted her was silence. The usual warmth of their home felt absent, cold. "Anthony," she called out, setting her bag on the floor. No response. Frowning, Belinda walked through the living room. The house felt empty. She glanced around, noticing that something was off. The couch was there, the TV, the dining room set. But the details, the small things, were gone. Her shoes, her coat, her perfume on the shelf by the mirror. Even the framed photos of their wedding and vacations gone. A chill crawled up her spine. She hurried to the bedroom, her heart racing as she swung open the closet doors. Her side was barren, not a single dress or pair of shoes in sight. Panic surged in her chest. She rushed back to the living room, grabbing her phone from her bag. She dialed Anthony's number, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. What the hell, she whispered, staring at the phone screen. She tried texting him, her fingers shaking as she typed. Anthony, where are you? Call me back. This isn't funny. She waited, the seconds dragging out into what felt like hours. But no response came. She started pacing the living room, her mind racing. Something was terribly wrong. Where had he gone? And why would he take all her things? It wasn't until she stepped into the kitchen that her heart nearly stopped. There on the counter lay a stack of papers. She recognized them immediately. Divorce papers. And on top of them, a printed photo with a note. Her stomach churned as she picked it up. It was a picture of her, Corey and Anthony, all smiling at their last summer barbecue. The irony hit her like a punch to the gut. They were standing together as if nothing could ever come between them. Now, that very photo felt like a cruel reminder of the lies and deceit that had shattered everything. Her eyes fell on a single note, written in familiar handwriting. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. The note was simple, brutal, and final. Bitch, you belong to the streets. Goodbye. Belinda stared at the note for what felt like an eternity. The words seemed to mock her, hanging in the air like a death sentence. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. She had been so careful, so sure that Anthony would never find out. But here it was, the ultimate proof that she had underestimated him. Her phone slipped from her hand and hit the floor. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, her breath quickening. Anthony knew. There was no denying it now. But how? Without thinking, she dialed Corey's number. Her fingers trembled as she held the phone to her ear, waiting for him to pick up. Corey's voice came through on the third ring, casual at first. Hey, what's up? What the hell is going on? She blurted out, her voice shaky and panicked. Corey paused. What do you mean? Anthony. Belinda snapped. He's gone, Corey. My stuff is gone. He left divorce papers on the counter. How does he know? Corey didn't respond immediately. She could hear the confusion in his silence. Then she heard a muffled sound on his end, followed by a long pause. Corey. Belinda's voice cracked. What's happening? Hold on. Corey stammered, the sound of a door opening in the background. I need to check something. Belinda paced back and forth, biting her lip as she waited. Her hands were shaking so badly, she had to grip the counter to steady herself. Suddenly, Corey's voice returned, quieter this time. Oh shit. What? What is it? Belinda demanded. I think Anthony sent your stuff to my house, Corey said, his voice tight. There's a delivery truck outside. Unloading boxes. They've got your name on them. Belinda's heart dropped into her stomach. She couldn't breathe. You're kidding. I'm not, Corey muttered. There's a picture taped to one of the boxes. Of us. From the barbecue. Belinda didn't need to ask which picture. She already knew. The same one that had been sitting on her kitchen counter. He knows, she whispered more to herself than to Corey. He knows everything. Corey's voice was barely a whisper now. Yeah, he knows. Without another word, Belinda hung up and bolted for the door. She drove the short distance to Corey's house in a blur, her mind spinning. When she pulled up in front of his house, the delivery truck was still there. The sight made her heart sink further. Boxes were stacked on Corey's front lawn. Her name scrawled on them in bold letters. It was undeniable. She got out of the car and walked toward the pile of boxes, her legs feeling like lead. Corey stood on the porch, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable as he watched her approach. Belinda didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She turned to Corey, her voice barely above a whisper. What do we do? Corey sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, Belinda. He's gone. He's not answering my calls either. Belinda bit her lip, her eyes burning with tears. He can't just disappear like this. Corey shook his head. He's pissed, Belinda. You've seen the note. He's not coming back. For the first time, the full weight of what she had done hit her. She had destroyed everything, her marriage, her life with Anthony. And for what? The thrill of an affair that had already lost its spark. Her legs gave out and she sat down on the porch steps, her head in her hands. "What are we going to do?" she muttered, her voice breaking. Corey didn't have an answer. He stood there in silence, watching her crumble. He didn't know what to say or do. This wasn't the grand love story they had imagined. It was a disaster and there was no way to fix it now. The two of them sat in silence, the reality of their situation sinking in. Anthony was gone, and with him, everything that had once made sense in their lives. Belinda looked at the boxes scattered on the lawn, the divorce papers still in her hand. She had lost everything in a single moment, and there was no going back. Belinda sat on the floor of her bedroom, her back against the wall, phone clutched tightly in her trembling hands. Her mind was racing, the silence of the room amplifying every thought, every regret. The note, Anthony's cold words written so plainly, kept flashing in her mind. "Bitch, you belong to the streets. Goodbye." She couldn't let it end like this. There had to be a way to fix this, to make him understand. Anthony wasn't the type to just walk away. He loved her, he always had. They had been through so much together, this couldn't be how it all came crashing down. With shaking hands, Belinda scrolled through her phone and dialed Anthony's number again. Her heart pounded in her chest as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. No answer. She cursed under her breath, her eyes filling with tears. Desperation began to sink in as she hit redial, hoping, praying that this time he would pick up. After what felt like an eternity, the ringing stopped and Anthony's voice came through the speaker. "What do you want, Belinda?" His voice was cold, distant. Belinda felt her breath catch in her throat. She had imagined this conversation going so many different ways, but now that she had him on the line, she didn't know where to start. Tears welled up in her eyes as she forced herself to speak. "Anthony, please just listen to me," she said, her voice cracking. "I know I messed up, I know I hurt you, but you think?" Anthony interrupted, his tone sharp and biting. "You think you messed up? Belinda, you didn't just mess up, you destroyed everything. You lied to me, cheated on me with Corey, and you expect me to listen? Please," Belinda begged, her voice shaking. "I'm so sorry, Anthony. It was a mistake, a mistake." Anthony laughed bitterly. "You don't accidentally screw someone, Belinda. Don't insult me by calling it a mistake." Belinda's heart sank. She could hear the venom in his voice, the pain she had caused him. He wasn't going to make this easy for her, but she had to try. She had to make him see that she regretted everything. "I know you're hurt," she whispered, wiping her tears. "I know you hate me right now, but please, let's just talk. We can fix this, Anthony. We can work through it. I'll do anything." There was a pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, Belinda thought maybe, just maybe, Anthony was considering it. Maybe he would agree to meet her, and they could talk this out like they always had. But then, Anthony's voice returned, colder than ever. "There's nothing to fix," he said flatly. "I'm done, Belinda." Belinda's breath hitched, her heart pounding in her chest. "Anthony, please. Please don't say that. You should have thought about all of this before you went behind my back," Anthony continued, his voice unwavering. "You betrayed me. You and Corey deserve each other. Don't ever contact me again." "No, please, Anthony," she cried, her voice breaking. "I'll do anything. Please just talk to me. Please." Anthony's silence hung heavy over the phone for what felt like an eternity. Belinda could barely breathe as she waited for him to say something, anything. But when he finally spoke, his words were like knives. "Goodbye, Belinda." With that, the line went dead. Belinda stared at her phone in disbelief, the dial tone ringing in her ears. Her hands shook as she dropped the phone onto the floor. The weight of what had just happened crashed down on her like a tidal wave, and she crumpled to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. She had lost him. She had lost everything. Her chest tightened as she gasped for breath, her sobs racking her body. How had it come to this? How had she let things spiral so far out of control? She never thought Anthony would find out. And even if he did, she had always believed he would forgive her. He had forgiven her for smaller things before. Missed anniversaries, forgotten promises, careless words spoken in anger. But this time was different. This time there was no coming back. She curled up on the floor, her tears soaking into the carpet, her mind replaying every moment of her betrayal. The sneaking around, the lies, the moments with Corey that felt thrilling at the time, but now seemed like the worst decisions of her life. How had she let herself fall so far? Her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Anthony. It was Corey. Belinda wiped her eyes, hesitating for a moment before answering. What? Belinda, I just spoke to him. Corey's voice came through, tense. He's serious. He's not coming back. He's filed for divorce. I know, Belinda whispered, her voice barely audible. Corey sighed on the other end. What are we going to do? Belinda didn't have an answer. She didn't know what to do. Everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. I don't know, she admitted. He's gone, Corey. He hates me. Corey was silent for a moment. Maybe we can still talk to him. Explain things. It wasn't supposed to go like this. Belinda squeezed her eyes shut, her tears falling again. He doesn't care. He doesn't want to hear anything we have to say. He's already made up his mind. The weight of those words crushed her. Anthony had always been her safety net, her constant. And now that was gone. Corey's voice softened. I'm sorry, Belinda. I didn't mean for this to happen. It's too late, she whispered. It's all too late. Belinda hung up, not wanting to hear Corey's apologies anymore. What good were apologies now? The damage was done. The life she had built with Anthony, the trust they had once shared, it was all shattered. She pulled herself up from the floor, her legs weak beneath her. The house felt emptier than ever, a hollow shell of the life she once had. She wandered through the rooms, her fingers trailing over the surfaces where her belongings had once been. Everything felt so different now, so foreign, as if she no longer belonged here. Belinda found herself back in the kitchen, staring down at the divorce papers on the counter. Anthony had signed them, his handwriting neat and final. She ran her fingers over his signature, her heart aching with the realization that this was real. This was happening. She had lost him, and there was no undoing what she had done. Her phone buzzed again, but she ignored it this time. It didn't matter who was calling. Nothing mattered anymore. The love of her life was gone, and all she had left were her regrets. Corey sat alone in the darkened living room of his now half-empty house, staring blankly at the empty wine glass in his hand. The sounds of children playing, once a comforting noise, were now conspicuously absent, replaced by the hollow echoes of his own thoughts. His wife had left with the kids just days earlier, and the house felt colder without them. He hadn't seen it coming, though in hindsight it had all been inevitable. It started with an anonymous letter slipped into his wife's hand one evening while she was picking up their daughter from school. The note had only a few words scrawled in sharp, messy handwriting. Your husband's been sleeping with Belinda. Ask Anthony if you don't believe me. Corey's wife, Claire, hadn't even waited to get home. She called Anthony immediately. He confirmed everything. The confrontation that followed was one Corey never saw coming, but he would never forget it. Claire stormed into the house, her face flushed with fury. You think I wouldn't find out, she spat, standing in the doorway with the letter crumpled in her fist. Corey froze, still seated at the dining table with his laptop open. He looked up, confused, but his stomach sank the moment he saw the look in her eyes. Find out what? He stammered, though deep down he knew exactly what this was about. She threw the note onto the table. You've been sleeping with Belinda. Corey stared at the note, his mouth suddenly dry. He opened his mouth to deny it, but no words came out. His silence spoke louder than any excuse could have. How could you do this to me? To us? To our kids? Claire's voice cracked with a mixture of rage and pain. Tears streamed down her face, and her hands shook as she gripped the back of a chair for support. Corey stood, trying to reach for her. Claire, Don't, she snapped, stepping back. Don't you dare touch me. I'm sorry, Corey muttered, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Oh, you didn't mean for it to happen? Claire's voice rose in disbelief. What? You just tripped and fell into bed with her. Is that it? Corey had no defense. There wasn't any defense for what he had done. He had betrayed his wife, his children, and his best friend in one fell swoop, all for an affair that had already lost its thrill the moment it was exposed. "I can't do this," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. "I won't do this." She turned on her heel, grabbing her coat and keys. Corey watched helplessly as she walked out the door. He chased after her, his heart pounding. "Claire, please don't go. We can talk about this." She stopped at the door, her back to him. "There's nothing left to talk about, Corey. I'm leaving and I'm taking the kids with me. Don't bother trying to fight this." Her voice was ice. "You've already lost us." With that, she was gone, and with her went everything that mattered to Corey. Belinda moved in with Corey a few days.